The wind screamed like a dying wolf as Helena Foster clutched her swollen belly, her mare stumbling through knee-deep snow that hadn't been there when she'd started this journey 3 hours ago. She should have stayed in Virginia City, Nevada, but the telegram had been urgent. Her sister was gravely ill in Carson City, and Helena had foolishly believed she could make the journey before the November storm hit. Now, as another contraction seized her body with vicious intensity, she realized she'd made a fatal mistake. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, but nature cared nothing for schedules or plans. Her vision blurred with tears and snow as she searched desperately for any sign of shelter. The landscape had transformed into an unforgiving white void. Each landmark she'd passed on the way to visit her late husband's family, now buried beneath the blizzard's fury. James had been dead 6 months, thrown from a spooked horse during a cattle drive, leaving her alone with nothing but debts and this child growing inside her. She'd sold everything to pay what he owed, planning to start fresh with her sister in Carson City. But now she wondered if she'd ever see another sunrise. The mare whinnied and reared slightly, nearly throwing Helena from the saddle. Through the swirling white, she glimpsed something dark and solid. A cabin, small but sturdy, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she nearly sobbed. She urged her horse forward, each step an eternity, until she reached the wooden structure and half fell, half dismounted from the saddle. Her legs buckled as another contraction hit, and she collapsed against the rough-hewn door, pounding with the last of her strength. The door swung open so suddenly, she tumbled forward into strong arms that caught her before she hit the floor. She found herself staring up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weathered but handsome face framed by dark hair dusted with snowflakes. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in simple ranch clothes, and his expression shifted instantly from surprise to concern as he took in her condition. "Madam, you're with child," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow felt safe despite their circumstances. "How far along?" "Nearly 9 months," Helena gasped, gripping his arm as another wave of pain rolled through her. "The baby is coming. I think the baby is coming now." The man's jaw tightened, but his movements remained calm and efficient as he swept her into his arms and carried her toward the bed in the corner of the single-room cabin. "My name is Benjamin Walker. I've delivered calves and foals, but never a human child. However, I'll do my best to help you through this. What's your name?" "Helena Foster," she managed, her fingers digging into his shirt as the contraction peaked. "I was traveling to Carson City when the storm hit. I should have known better. I should have waited." "No use dwelling on should-haves now," Benjamin said, settling her onto the bed with surprising gentleness. "Your horse is outside. I need to stable her before she freezes, but I'll be quick. Can you manage for a few minutes?" Helena nodded, though terror gripped her heart at the thought of being alone even for that brief time. Benjamin seemed to read her fear because he squeezed her hand reassuringly before pulling on his heavy coat and heading back into the storm. True to his word, he returned within minutes, his face red from the cold, snow clinging to his beard. He shed the coat quickly and moved to build up the fire, then filled a large pot with water and set it to heat. "I have clean linens," he said, more to himself than to her, pulling items from a chest. "My mother always insisted on keeping a well-stocked home, and I've maintained her standards even living alone out here." "Why do you live alone?" Helena asked, partly from genuine curiosity and partly to distract herself from the increasing frequency of her contractions. The question seemed too personal for strangers, but normal social conventions felt absurd when a man was about to help birth your child. Benjamin's hands paused briefly in their work before continuing. I prefer solitude. I ranch about 200 acres here, run cattle and horses, make enough to live comfortably. The nearest town is Lovelock, about 15 miles northeast, but I only go in for supplies every few weeks. He brought the linens and warm water to the bedside, his expression carefully neutral. I was married once. She died of fever 4 years ago. We never had children, which she grieved over terribly. After she passed, I found I couldn't bear the pity in people's eyes, so I moved out here to this old line shack I'd inherited from my uncle and built it into something more permanent. I'm sorry, Helena whispered, understanding his pain all too well. My husband died 6 months ago. Thrown from a horse during a drive. We'd only been married a year. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a connection formed between them, forged by shared loss and desperate circumstances. Benjamin cleared his throat and began rolling up his sleeves. Well then, Mrs. Foster, let's make sure your child comes into this world safely. That's what matters now. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Benjamin proved himself remarkably capable, his ranch experience translating better than expected to human childbirth. He spoke to her in calm, steady tones, telling her when to push and when to rest, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, never showing fear even when Helena was certain she was dying. Outside, the storm raged with apocalyptic fury, the wind howling like demons, but inside the cabin, there was only the fire's warmth, Benjamin's steady presence, and Helena's determination to bring her child safely into the world. I can see the head, Benjamin said, his voice tight with concentration. You're doing wonderfully, Helena. Just a bit more. On the next contraction, give me everything you have. She bore down with a primal scream that seemed to come from the earth itself, and suddenly the pressure released. A baby's cry pierced the air, thin and wavering but unmistakably alive. Helena collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Benjamin worked quickly, his large hands surprisingly deft as he cleaned the infant and wrapped it in soft cloth. You have a son, he said, his voice rough with emotion as he placed the tiny bundle in her arms. A healthy, beautiful son. Helena stared down at the red, squalling face of her child, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. This was James's son, the last piece of her husband still living in the world. But even as that thought crossed her mind, she looked up at Benjamin, who stood watching them with an expression of such tender wonder that her heart contracted painfully. This stranger had just given her the most precious gift imaginable, her child's life and her own. Thank you, she whispered. Benjamin, I cannot possibly thank you enough. He ducked his head, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. Now rest while I clean up, and then we'll see about getting some food into you. You'll need your strength. Over the following days, as the storm continued its relentless assault on the Nevada wilderness, Helena and Benjamin settled into an unexpected domesticity. He proved to be an excellent cook, making hearty stews and fresh bread that restored her strength. He'd given her his bed while he slept on the floor near the fire, refusing all her protests. He'd even fashioned a cradle from a wooden crate, lining it with soft blankets so the baby had a proper place to sleep. Helena named her son James, after his father, but found herself calling him Jamie to differentiate him from her memories. The infant had a healthy appetite and strong lungs, which he demonstrated frequently during the nights. Benjamin never complained about the crying, instead often rising before Helena could to check on the baby, bringing him to her for feeding with a gentleness that made her chest ache. On the 4th day of their confinement, as Helena sat in the rocking chair Benjamin had pulled near the fire, nursing Jamie while Benjamin prepared supper. She studied him openly. He moved with the efficient grace of a man accustomed to caring for himself. But there was something careful in how he maintained distance between them, as though afraid of overstepping invisible boundaries. "The storm seems to be easing," she observed, noting how the wind's howl had diminished to a steady whisper. Benjamin glanced toward the window, though there was little to see in the darkness. "Yes, I expect by tomorrow it will have passed. The day after, the snow should be packed enough for travel, though it will be slow going." Something cold settled in Helena's stomach, though she couldn't name why. Of course she would leave once it was safe. She'd been traveling to Carson City for a reason. Her sister needed her, or had needed her before this delay. Yet the thought of leaving this warm cabin and the man who'd become her unlikely savior filled her with unexpected reluctance. "I'll need to send word to my sister," she said quietly. "She must be frantic with worry. The telegram said she was gravely ill, and now I've been missing for nearly a week." Benjamin's back stiffened slightly at the stove. "Lovelock has a telegraph office. Once we can travel, I'll take you there. It's closer than pushing on to Carson City, especially with a newborn. You can wire your sister, and we can arrange proper transportation for you when you're fully recovered." "That's very kind of you," Helena said, though the words felt inadequate. Everything he'd done was kind, far beyond what strangers owed each other. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for your help." He turned then, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "I don't want repayment, Helena. What I did, any decent person would do. You and the baby needed help, and I was here to provide it. That's the end of it." But it wasn't the end of it, and they both knew it. Something had grown between them in these days of forced intimacy, something neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Helena found herself watching Benjamin when he wasn't looking, noticing the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at Jamie, the way his rare smile transformed his serious face. She'd loved James with the passionate certainty of youth, but this feeling creeping over her was different, steadier, deeper, born of trust and respect rather than mere attraction. That night, after Helena had settled Jamie in his cradle and returned to bed, she lay awake listening to Benjamin's steady breathing from his bedroll by the fire. The intimacy of sharing this small space with him should have felt wrong so soon after James's death, but instead it felt natural, as though she'd known Benjamin far longer than a handful of days. Perhaps extreme circumstances accelerated normal human connection, stripping away the pretense and small talk that usually preceded real knowing. "Benjamin," she whispered into the darkness, uncertain if he was awake. "Are you sleeping?" A pause, then his voice came low and careful. "No." "Is something wrong? Is the baby well?" "Jamie's fine. I just wanted to ask you something." She took a breath, gathering courage. "Why haven't you remarried? 4 years is a long time to be alone." The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he shifted, and she heard him sit up. "May I be honest with you, Helena, please? I think we're past the point of polite evasions, don't you?" A soft huff that might have been laughter. "True enough. The honest answer is that I haven't met anyone who made me want to try again. My wife, Sarah, she was a good woman, but our marriage was more partnership than passion. We grew up neighbors, married young because it was expected. I cared for her deeply, but I'm not certain I truly knew what love could be until she was gone and I was free to imagine what I might have wanted instead." "That sounds terrible, doesn't it?" "No," Helena said softly. "It sounds honest. My marriage to James was passionate but brief. We barely knew each other before we married. His family disapproved because I had no dowry, which caused friction between us. Then he died, and I was left with nothing but debts and a child. Sometimes I wonder if we would have made it work long term or if the cracks would have eventually broken us. You can't torture yourself with what-ifs, Benjamin said. The past is done. All we have is what's in front of us. And what's in front of you? Helena asked, her heart pounding at her own boldness. Another long silence. That's a dangerous question, Mrs. Foster. Perhaps. But I find myself curious about the answer nonetheless. She heard him stand, saw his shadow move to the window where he stood looking out at the snow-covered landscape silvered by moonlight. What's in front of me is a woman I've known less than a week, a widow with a newborn child who will leave for Carson City as soon as she's able. A woman who, despite all logic and propriety, I find myself thinking about far more than I should. A woman I have no right to even contemplate in the way I've been contemplating. Helena's breath caught. She rose carefully from the bed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and crossed to stand beside him at the window. And what if that woman found herself thinking similar thoughts? What if she found herself wondering what might happen if she didn't leave? Benjamin turned to face her, his expression tortured. Helena, you're vulnerable right now. You've just given birth. You've been through a trauma. You're grateful to me for helping. These feelings, they're natural, but they are not real. In a few weeks, when you're recovered and back with your family, you'll realize that. Don't tell me what I feel, she said, a flash of anger giving her strength. I may have just given birth, but I'm not addled. I know the difference between gratitude and something more. And I know that when I look at you, I see a future I hadn't imagined possible. I see a good man who lives by his convictions, who handles a newborn infant with more care than many fathers show their own children, who gave a stranger his bed and asked nothing in return. I see someone I could love, Benjamin, if given the chance. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. You don't know what you're saying. Then prove me wrong, she challenged. Kiss me. If there's nothing there, I'll leave for Carson City as planned and never speak of this again. But if there is something, if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, then we owe it to ourselves to explore this honestly. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his eyes searching her face as though trying to memorize every detail. Then he lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then something ignited between them. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into his embrace, the blanket falling forgotten to the floor. This kiss was nothing like the ones she'd shared with James. This was deeper, richer, full of promise and possibility. This was coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. God help me, Helena, but I felt that down to my bones. So did I, she whispered. So what do we do now? He pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders. Now we think clearly. You still need to contact your sister, make sure she's all right. I won't be the reason you abandon family obligations. And you need time to properly heal from childbirth. What we're feeling, if it's real, it will still be there in a few weeks or months. We can take our time, do this properly. Helena wanted to argue, to insist that she knew her own mind, but the reasonable part of her recognized his wisdom. She'd made one impulsive marriage already. If this was going to be different, if this was going to last, they needed to build it on a foundation stronger than desperate circumstances and heightened emotions. You're right, she admitted reluctantly. But I want to be clear about one thing. I'm not promising to go to Carson City permanently. I'll wire my sister, make sure she's recovering, or arrange for her care if needed. But my future, Benjamin Walker, I'm hoping that might be here with you if you'll have me. His smile, when it came, was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. I'd like that very much, Helena Foster. More than I can properly express. Jamie chose that moment to wake with a piercing cry, and they broke apart, laughing softly at the infant's impeccable timing. Helena went to tend to her son while Benjamin returned to his bedroll, but something fundamental had shifted between them. The cabin no longer felt like a temporary shelter, but rather like the beginning of something permanent and precious. The following morning dawned clear and brilliantly cold, the sky a blue so intense it hurt to look at. Benjamin ventured outside to assess conditions and returned announcing that travel would be possible by the next day. Helena felt a curious mix of relief and disappointment. She needed to contact her sister, yes, but part of her wanted to remain cocooned in this cabin with Benjamin a while longer, away from the complications of the wider world. As Benjamin worked to clear a path to the barn and check on the livestock, Helena took stock of her situation with clear eyes. She was a widow with a week-old infant, no money beyond the few dollars she'd had in her pocket when the storm hit, and no prospects. Her sister's illness had been the excuse to leave Virginia City and the pitying stares of James's family, who'd made it abundantly clear they blamed her for their son's death. They'd taken the horse, the saddle, the very clothes off her back, claiming they were owed restitution for James's debts. She'd been left with nothing but her own mare, the clothes she wore, and her pride. Carson City had represented escape, a chance to start over with the only family she had left. But now, looking around Benjamin's cabin with its solid construction and homey touches, she wondered if perhaps fate had intervened. Perhaps the storm hadn't been a disaster but a blessing in disguise, steering her toward something better than she'd imagined possible. Benjamin came in stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks ruddy with cold. The horses are fine, fat and sassy from being laid up in the barn. I've got 2 plus your mare, so we'll have no trouble getting to Lovelock tomorrow. It's a good town, decent folks. The doctor there can check you and the baby, make sure everything is healing properly. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, Helena said, bouncing Jamie gently as he fussed. Benjamin, I need to be honest about my circumstances. I have very little money. Certainly not enough to pay a doctor or arrange transportation to Carson City. My husband's family took everything when he died, claimed it was owed to them. I'm not asking for charity, but I need you to know I can't repay your kindness financially. Benjamin's expression darkened. They took everything from a pregnant widow. What kind of people would do such a thing? People who never wanted their son to marry a poor girl in the first place, Helena said with a bitter smile. They weren't cruel about it, just coldly practical. James had debts from gambling they'd covered, and when he died, they wanted their money back. I had nothing to give but what he'd bought during our marriage. That's unconscionable, Benjamin said flatly. He crossed to where she sat and knelt beside the chair, his hand covering hers. Listen to me, Helena. I don't want your money. I have more than enough for my needs, and helping you costs me nothing. We'll see the doctor, send your telegram, and then figure out what comes next together. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand? Tears pricked her eyes at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. I understand. Thank you. That evening, their last in the cabin before venturing to Lovelock, passed with a bittersweet quality. They prepared supper together, moving around each other with the ease of long practice despite their short acquaintance. After eating, Benjamin produced a worn book of poetry and read aloud while Helena nursed Jamie, his deep voice lending music to the words. It felt profoundly domestic, like a glimpse of what their life together could be. Later, as they prepared for bed, Benjamin cleared his throat awkwardly. Helena, I want to propose something, but I need you to think carefully before answering. Don't give me a response tonight. Sleep on it and tell me your decision tomorrow. Curious, Helena nodded. All right. What is it? "Marry me," he said simply. "Not right away, but soon. I know it seems rushed, and by all conventional standards it is. But I'm 32 years old, and I've learned that life is too short to waste time on conventions when you know what you want. I want you, Helena, and I want to be a father to Jamie. I can provide for you both, give you a good life here. I'm not a rich man, but I'm comfortable, and I'll work hard to make you happy." Helena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Benjamin," he held up a hand. "Don't answer now. I mean it. You've been through too much, and I won't have you making decisions because you feel you have no other options. Tomorrow, after we reach Lovelock and you've had a chance to contact your sister, after you've seen that there are other paths available to you, then decide. If you choose to go to Carson City, I'll help you get there and wish you well. But if you choose to stay, choose me, then I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." That night, Helena lay awake for hours, Jamie sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside the bed, Benjamin steady breathing a counterpoint from the floor. Marriage again, so soon after being widowed. What would people say? But then, what did she care what people said? Her life was her own to live as she saw fit. The real question was whether her feelings for Benjamin were genuine or simply born of circumstance and need. She examined her heart carefully, honestly. When she thought of Benjamin, what did she feel? Gratitude, yes, but that was the least of it. She felt safe with him, valued. She respected his strength and his gentleness, his practical competence and his surprising poetry. When he'd kissed her, she'd felt more alive than in all her months of marriage to James, more seen and understood. Was it love? Perhaps not yet, not the deep, abiding love of years spent together. But it was the beginning of love, the seed that could grow into something magnificent given time and nurturing. And Jamie needed a father. She could provide for her son alone if she had to, would work her fingers to the bone to give him a good life. But how much better would it be for him to have a father like Benjamin, who already looked at the infant with such tenderness? James would want his son cared for, would want Helena to be happy. She was certain of that much at least. By the time dawn broke, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, Helena had made her decision. She rose and dressed quietly, then prepared breakfast while Benjamin still slept. When he finally stirred, she brought him coffee and smiled at his surprised expression. "Good morning," she said softly. "I have an answer to your question if you're ready to hear it." Benjamin sat up quickly, suddenly alert despite his sleepy eyes. "Are you certain? You don't need more time, I'm certain. And my answer is yes, Benjamin Walker, I'll marry you and gladly. Not because I have no other options, though God knows my choices are limited, but because when I imagine my future, the only version that brings me joy is the one where you're in it. I can't promise you I'm completely healed from losing James, and I can't promise there won't be hard days ahead. But I can promise I'll do my very best to be a good wife to you, and to build a life together that honors what we've both survived." The smile that broke across Benjamin's face was like watching winter transform into spring. He stood and crossed to her in 2 long strides, pulling her into his arms and lifting her clean off her feet. "You've just made me the happiest man in Nevada, Helena Foster. I swear to you, you won't regret this." "I know I won't," she said, laughing as he spun her around before setting her back down. "Now sit and eat your breakfast before it gets cold. We have a town to reach and arrangements to make." The journey to Lovelock took most of the day despite the relatively short distance. The snow was deep, and the horses had to pick their way carefully. Benjamin had fashioned a sling for Helena to wear so she could carry Jamie against her chest, keeping him warm and secure. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently to rest, Benjamin ever attentive to Helena's comfort despite her insistence that she was fine. Lovelock proved to be a pleasant town of perhaps 300 souls, nestled in the valley with the snow-capped mountains standing sentinel in the distance. They rode down the main street, drawing curious stares, and Benjamin led them directly to a neat white house with a sign declaring it the residence of Dr. Marcus Hayes. The doctor was a kindly man in his 50s who examined both Helena and Jamie with efficient thoroughness. He pronounced them both healthy, though he urged Helena to rest as much as possible for another few weeks and to take care not to overtax her strength. Benjamin hovered nearby throughout the examination, and the doctor's eyes twinkled knowingly. "This your husband, doctor?" Hayes asked Helena as he finished his work. "Soon to be," Helena said, blushing slightly. "He delivered Jamie during the storm, saved both our lives." "Did he now? Well then, young man, you did fine work. Mother and baby are both in excellent condition." The doctor clapped Benjamin on the shoulder. "You'll want to see Reverend Matthews about arranging a wedding. He's usually at the church this time of day." Benjamin paid the doctor, despite Helena's protests, and they made their way to the general store where he purchased supplies and several ready-made dresses in Helena's size, insisting she needed more than the single worn dress she'd been living in. Then they headed to the telegraph office where Helena composed a wire to her sister. The response came back within an hour, and Helena sagged with relief as she read it. Her sister had recovered from her illness, which had been severe influenza but was now past. She was concerned about Helena's safety, but understood from the telegram that plans had changed. Helena sent a second wire explaining that she would be staying in Lovelock, that she'd married, and would write with full details soon. It was a small lie, telling her sister they'd already married, but easier than explaining the full complicated truth via expensive telegram. With that weight off her shoulders, Helena felt free to embrace her new future fully. They found the Reverend, a jovial man with a booming laugh, who agreed to perform the ceremony in 3 days' time, allowing them to post the required public notice of intent. Benjamin arranged for them to stay at the town's small boarding house in the interim, paying for 2 rooms, though Helena suspected they'd only use one after the first night. Those 3 days in Lovelock passed in a blur of preparation and growing excitement. Benjamin introduced Helena to various townspeople, all of whom welcomed her warmly once they heard the story of how they'd met. Several women came by the boarding house with gifts for the baby: tiny knitted caps, soft blankets, a beautiful christening gown. The kindness of strangers overwhelmed Helena, so different from the cold reception she'd received from James's family. On the morning of the wedding, Helena woke with butterflies dancing in her stomach. She'd been married before, yes, but that ceremony had been hurried and strained, James's family barely civil, her own family absent. This felt different, more real somehow despite its quickness. She dressed in the nicest of the dresses Benjamin had bought her, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned up her hair with trembling fingers. Mrs. Harlow, the boarding house keeper, knocked softly and entered with a small bouquet of winter greenery tied with ribbon. "Every bride should have flowers," the older woman said kindly. "These aren't much, but they'll do." "They're perfect," Helena whispered, tears threatening. "Thank you for your kindness." The wedding took place in the small white church at the edge of town, with perhaps 20 townspeople in attendance along with Dr. Hayes, Mrs. Harlow, and several of Benjamin's ranching neighbors. Benjamin stood at the altar looking impossibly handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes bright with emotion as Helena walked down the short aisle holding Jamie in one arm and her bouquet in the other. Reverend Matthews kept the ceremony brief, but heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Benjamin's voice rang out clear and strong, his eyes never leaving Helena's face. "I, Benjamin Walker, take you, Helena Foster, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." Helena repeated the words, her own voice steady despite her emotions. And when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin's kiss was both promise and homecoming, sweet and tender and full of hope. The townspeople had organized a small reception at the boarding house, with cake and coffee and much laughter. Jamie was passed from woman to woman, cooed over and admired, while Benjamin stayed close to Helena's side, his hand never far from hers. As the afternoon wore into evening and the guests began to depart, Benjamin leaned down to whisper in her ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Walker." The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, let's go home." They collected their belongings and Jamie, then rode out of Lovelock as the sun set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and pink. The journey back to the cabin took longer in the fading light, but Helena didn't mind. She rode beside her new husband, her son secure in her arms, heading toward a future that felt solid and real. When they finally reached the cabin, Benjamin insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. He set her down gently in front of the fire he'd left banked that morning, then went to tend the horses while Helena fed Jamie and settled him in his cradle. When Benjamin returned, stamping snow from his boots, Helena was standing by the window looking out at the moonlit landscape. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "Not a single one," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Though I have a confession to make." His eyebrows rose. "Oh, I'm terrified," she admitted. "Not of you, but of being happy. The last time I let myself feel secure, it was all taken away. I'm afraid that if I love you too much, something will happen to destroy this." Benjamin cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious. "I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen, Helena. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." She believed him. More than that, she felt it in her bones, this certainty that they were meant to find each other, that the storm had been fate's way of bringing them together. She rose on her toes and kissed him, putting all her hope and fear and love into that kiss. Benjamin responded in kind, his arms tightening around her, and for a long moment they simply held each other, two people who'd found unexpected salvation in the midst of a blizzard. That night, for the first time, Benjamin didn't sleep on the floor. He held Helena in his arms, both of them fully clothed and respectful of her recent childbirth, but the intimacy of simply lying together was profound. They talked in whispers so as not to wake Jamie, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Dawn was breaking before they finally drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's warmth. The weeks that followed established the rhythm of their new life together. Benjamin taught Helena the workings of the ranch, showing her how to care for the horses and cattle, where the property lines ran, which neighbors were trustworthy, and which required a wary eye. She proved an apt pupil, her farm girl upbringing serving her well despite her years away from that life. Helena, in turn, transformed the cabin into a true home. She sewed curtains for the windows, braided rugs for the floors, organized Benjamin's haphazard storage into something sensible. She cooked meals that made him groan with pleasure, discovering that she enjoyed caring for him in these small domestic ways. Jamie thrived, growing plumper and more alert by the day, his eyes tracking his parents' movements with increasing interest. But it wasn't all easy adjustment. There were moments when Helena would catch herself comparing Benjamin to James, feeling guilty for the comparison even though Benjamin always came out favorably. There were times when grief would hit her unexpectedly, mourning not just James but the life she'd imagined they'd have together. Benjamin proved endlessly patient during these episodes, holding her when she needed comfort, giving her space when she needed solitude, never demanding more than she could give. 6 weeks after the wedding, Dr. Hayes came out to the ranch to check on Helena's recovery. He examined her thoroughly and pronounced her healed, smiling knowingly as he packed up his bag. "You're a lucky woman, Mrs. Walker. Lucky in your health and lucky in your husband. Not many men would have the patience to let a new bride recover properly before demanding his conjugal rights." Helena blushed furiously, but didn't contradict him. Benjamin had indeed been remarkably patient, seeming content with kisses and gentle caresses, never pushing for more despite the desire she sometimes saw burning in his eyes. That night, after the doctor had left and Jamie was asleep in his cradle, Helena found Benjamin in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. "Dr. Hayes says I'm healed," she said without preamble, her heart pounding. Benjamin looked up from the horse, his expression carefully neutral. "That's good news. I'm glad you're well, Benjamin." She crossed to him, placing her hand on his chest. "I want to truly be your wife in every way." His hand covered hers, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain?" "There's no rush, Helena. I meant what I said about being patient." "I'm certain," she said firmly. "I want this. I want you." The desire that flared in his eyes took her breath away. He pulled her close, his kiss deep and demanding in a way he'd held back from before. "The mare can wait," he said roughly, and swept her into his arms, carrying her back to the cabin and to the marriage bed they'd shared so chastely until now. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate by turns, Benjamin taking his time to ensure her pleasure despite his own clear need. Afterward, lying wrapped in each other's arms, Helena felt a peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. This was what marriage should be: partnership and passion, respect and desire all mingled together into something greater than the sum of its parts. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I don't know when it happened exactly, but I do. I love you, Benjamin Walker." His arms tightened around her. "I love you too, Helena. Have since that first night, I think, watching you fight so hard to bring Jamie into the world. You're the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known, and I thank God every day for that storm that brought you to me." Winter gradually gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal the greening landscape beneath. Benjamin's ranch came alive with new calves and foals, keeping them both busy from dawn to dusk. Jamie grew and changed daily, his toothless smile greeting them each morning, his gurgling laugh the soundtrack to their days. Helena had never been happier, had never imagined she could feel so complete. In May, her sister Margaret finally made the journey from Carson City to visit. The sisters embraced tearfully on the cabin's front porch, both talking over each other in their excitement. Margaret was thin from her illness but recovering, her eyes bright with curiosity as she took in Helena's new life. "You look happy," Margaret said wonderingly as they sat together that evening, watching Benjamin play with Jamie on a blanket near the fire. "Truly happy in a way I never saw with James." "I am happy," Helena confirmed. "I know it must seem strange, remarrying so quickly, but Benjamin is a good man, Margaret, the very best of men. He treats me as an equal partner, respects my opinions, adores Jamie as though he were his own. I feel guilty sometimes for being so content when James has been gone such a short time." Margaret squeezed her hand. James would want you happy, Helena. He had his faults, we both know that, but he loved you. He'd be glad you found someone to care for you and his son. Don't let guilt rob you of joy. The visit lasted a week, and by the time Margaret departed, Benjamin had won her over completely with his quiet kindness and steady devotion to Helena. She extracted a promise that they'd visit Carson City before year's end, and Helena agreed readily, already planning the trip. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and long, golden days. The ranch prospered, and Benjamin hired 2 hands to help with the growing workload. Helena planted a vegetable garden that flourished under her care, and she began keeping chickens for eggs and meat. Jamie took his first tottering steps in July, launching himself from Helena's arms toward Benjamin with a shriek of glee, and both parents laughed and applauded as though he'd performed a miracle. It was in late August, while preserving the last of the summer vegetables, that Helena realized she'd missed her monthly courses. The realization stopped her mid-motion, her hands stilling over the jars. She'd been so busy, so caught up in the rhythm of their life, that she hadn't noticed until now. Counting backward, she calculated she was at least 6 weeks along, possibly more. That evening, after Jamie was asleep, she told Benjamin. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and her heart began to sink. Perhaps he didn't want more children. Perhaps one was enough. But then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him. "Another baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Helena, that's wonderful news, unless you're not happy about it. I know Jamie's still so young." "I'm happy," she assured him, laughing at his boyish excitement. "Surprised but happy. I hadn't thought it would happen so quickly." "We'll need a bigger house," Benjamin said, already planning. "I've been thinking about it anyway. This cabin was fine for 1 person, adequate for 3, but with 4 and possibly more in the future, we need proper space. There's that meadow to the south, good building site. We could start in the spring, have it ready before next winter." They talked late into the night about their plans, their dreams. Benjamin wanted at least 4 children, maybe more if Helena was willing. He spoke of the ranch growing, of building something lasting to pass on to their children. Helena listened, her hand resting on her still flat belly, overwhelmed by the richness of the future stretching before them. The pregnancy progressed easily, though Helena tired more quickly than she had with Jamie, chasing after an energetic toddler while growing another child. Benjamin was wonderfully attentive, taking on more of the household chores without complaint, often sending her to rest while he managed both ranch work and childcare. His 2 hired hands proved invaluable, managing the day-to-day operations while Benjamin focused on his growing family. In late September, they made the promised trip to Carson City to visit Margaret. The journey that had nearly killed Helena a year ago passed uneventfully under clear autumn skies. Margaret had made a full recovery and was courting a bank clerk, shy but clearly smitten. The sisters spent hours talking and laughing while Benjamin explored the city and entertained Jamie. It was a healing visit, mending the months of separation. Before they left, Helena and Benjamin stood at James's grave in the city cemetery. Helena placed flowers on the headstone, her hand held firmly in Benjamin's. "Thank you," she whispered to the memory of her first husband. "For Jamie. For everything you tried to give me. Rest easy. We're taken care of now." Benjamin squeezed her hand, and they walked away together, their son between them, their future ahead. Winter returned, but this time Helena faced it with confidence and joy. They'd begun preliminary work on the new house, clearing the site and stockpiling materials, planning to begin construction in earnest come spring. Christmas was celebrated with Margaret joining them, the cabin full of laughter and love. Jamie toddled everywhere, getting into everything, his vocabulary expanding daily. Helena's belly grew round and prominent, the baby inside active and strong. In March of 1874, with the spring thaw just beginning, Helena went into labor for the second time. This time there was no panic, no storm, no desperate circumstances. Dr. Hayes was there, having come to stay at the ranch the week before, expecting the birth. Benjamin held Helena's hand throughout, murmuring encouragement, and when their daughter finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, tears streamed openly down his face. "A girl," he said reverently, cradling the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "Helena, we have a daughter." They named her Sarah Ruth, honoring both Benjamin's first wife and Helena's mother. Jamie, now walking and talking in short sentences, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Benjamin proved just as devoted a father the second time around, rising for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours simply holding his daughter and marveling at her existence. Construction on the new house began in April and progressed rapidly, with Benjamin working alongside professional carpenters he'd hired from Lovelock. By September, the structure was complete, a proper 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a parlor, and even indoor plumbing with water pumped from a new well. Helena walked through the empty rooms, already envisioning them filled with furniture and life and love. They moved in before the first snow, and Helena spent the winter making the house a home. She sewed curtains and quilts, arranged furniture, hung pictures. Benjamin's ranch continued to prosper, and he hired 2 more permanent hands, building a small bunkhouse for them near the barn. What had been a lonely outpost for a grieving widower had become a thriving family ranch. Jamie started his lessons with Helena teaching him letters and numbers at the kitchen table. Sarah grew from an infant into a plump, cheerful toddler who adored her big brother. And in the fall of 1875, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. Benjamin's joy was uncontained, and this time they hoped for another son. The pattern of their lives settled into comfortable routine marked by the seasons. Spring brandings and plantings, summer growth and long days, autumn harvests and preparations, winter rest and family time. Helena and Benjamin grew deeper in love with each passing year, their partnership strengthening through shared work and shared joy. They weathered difficulties together. A harsh winter that killed some cattle, a barn fire that required rebuilding, childhood illnesses that terrified them both until the fevers broke. Their third child was indeed a boy, born in May of 1876. They named him Thomas Benjamin, called him Tommy from the start. Jamie, now a sturdy 4-year-old, took his role as big brother seriously, helping Helena with both younger children. Sarah proved to be a bright, curious child, always asking questions, never sitting still. In 1877, Margaret married her bank clerk and moved to Sacramento, California. Helena missed her sister but was glad she'd found happiness. They maintained a faithful correspondence, letters traveling back and forth several times a year, each sister sharing the details of her life. When Tommy was 2, Helena found herself pregnant for a 4th time. At 31, she felt the pregnancy more than the previous ones, her body slower to bounce back. Benjamin worried over her constantly, insisting she rest more, hiring a woman from Lovelock to help with the housework. But Helena was fundamentally healthy and strong, and when her labor began in late January of 1879, she approached it with the calm confidence of experience. This labor was faster than the others, and their second daughter, Emma Jane, arrived before Dr. Hayes could make it through the winter roads. Benjamin delivered his daughter himself, coming full circle to that desperate night 6 years earlier when he delivered a stranger's child and found his future. Emma was tiny but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. "4 children," Benjamin said that night, holding Emma while Helena rested, their other 3 children sleeping in their rooms down the hall. "When I think back to that lonely man I was, living alone in that cabin, I can barely recognize him. You gave me this, Helena. This family, this life, this joy. You saved me as surely as I saved you that night in the storm." "We saved each other," Helena corrected, reaching out to touch his face. "Neither of us would be here without the other." "That storm was fate, Benjamin, bringing us together exactly when we both needed it most." The years continued to pass, marked by growth and change. The ranch expanded to nearly 500 acres, one of the largest in the region. Jamie grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch work, often riding out with Benjamin and the hands. Sarah proved to be bookish and artistic, filling page after page with drawings and stories. Tommy was the adventurer, always climbing trees and exploring, giving his parents heart attacks regularly. Emma was still too young to show her personality, but she was a cuddly, affectionate baby who rarely cried. In 1881, when Jamie was 8, Benjamin hired a school teacher to come live on the ranch and educate their children along with the children of several neighboring families. Miss Peterson was a young woman from Boston seeking adventure out west, and she proved an excellent teacher. The South Parlor was converted into a schoolroom, and every weekday morning it filled with children learning their letters and figures. Helena found deep satisfaction in watching her children grow and learn. She'd come so far from that desperate, frightened woman fleeing through a blizzard, her future uncertain, her hope nearly dead. Now she was surrounded by love and life, her days full of purpose and meaning. She and Benjamin had built something real and lasting, a legacy that would endure. Their relationship continued to deepen with time. They were partners in every sense, consulting each other on all decisions, working side by side when needed. But they also maintained romance, stealing moments alone when they could, taking long rides together while the children were in school, maintaining the spark that had ignited that first night. Benjamin never stopped looking at Helena as though she was precious beyond measure, and she never stopped feeling grateful for the steady, constant love he offered. In the summer of 1882, Helena discovered she was pregnant for the 5th time at age 36. She and Benjamin hadn't been trying to prevent or encourage pregnancy, simply accepting what came. This pregnancy was harder, though, her body clearly feeling the strain of 5 babies in 9 years. Dr. Hayes, now elderly and looking toward retirement, urged her to rest as much as possible. The baby came early in December rather than the expected January, a tiny boy they named Daniel Michael. He was smaller than the others had been, more fragile, and for the first few weeks, Helena and Benjamin lived in constant fear. But Daniel proved tougher than he looked, thriving despite his rough start, and by spring he'd caught up to where he should be. Jamie was now 9, tall for his age and capable of real work around the ranch. Sarah was 7, still bookish but also showing an interest in helping Helena in the kitchen and garden. Tommy at 6 was pure energy, and 5-year-old Emma was his devoted shadow. With Daniel making 6 children, the house that had seemed so spacious now felt comfortably full of life and noise. Helena and Benjamin agreed that Daniel would be their last. Her body needed rest, and truthfully, 6 children felt like abundance beyond measure. They had 3 sons and 3 daughters, all healthy, all loved. It was more than either of them had dared hope for in those early desperate days. The years rolled on in their pleasant rhythm. Helena's hair began showing threads of silver, laugh lines deepening around her eyes. Benjamin's dark hair grayed at the temples, his body still strong from ranch work, but bearing the marks of time. They watched their children grow and change, each finding their own path. Jamie, as expected, took to ranching like he was born to it, learning everything Benjamin could teach him about livestock and land management. By the time he was 16 in 1889, he was essentially Benjamin's partner, trusted to make important decisions. Sarah surprised everyone by showing a talent for numbers, keeping the ranch books with meticulous accuracy while also pursuing her art. Tommy remained an adventurer, talking about joining the army or becoming a railroad man, eager to see what lay beyond their Nevada valley. Emma, sweet and gentle, loved animals and spent hours helping with the horses. Daniel, the baby, was only 7 but already showing signs of being the scholar of the family, always reading, always asking questions. In 1890, Margaret visited from California with her husband and their 3 children. The cousins had never met, and watching them play together filled Helena with deep contentment. She and Margaret sat on the porch of the big house, watching the children run through the yard, their husbands talking ranching and business nearby. "I can barely believe this is your life," Margaret said, shaking her head in wonder. "That desperate, frightened woman who barely survived that storm, look what she built." "Look what we built," Helena corrected, glancing at Benjamin. "I had the seed of it, maybe, but he gave it room to grow. I still think about that night sometimes, how close I came to dying in the snow. If I hadn't seen his cabin lights, if he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have any of this." "Fate," Margaret said firmly. "It was meant to be. Some people search their whole lives for what you two found in a single night." Helena nodded, knowing her sister was right. She and Benjamin had been extraordinarily lucky, given a second chance when they'd both needed it most. They'd seized that chance with both hands and built a life beyond their wildest dreams. In 1892, Jamie married a rancher's daughter from Lovelock, a capable young woman named Alice who fit seamlessly into their family. They built a small house on the eastern section of the ranch, planning to eventually take over those acres while Benjamin and Helena kept the main property. The wedding was a grand affair, half the county in attendance, and Helena cried happy tears watching her firstborn start his own family. Sarah left for San Francisco in 1893 to study art formally, her talent demanding proper training. Helena missed her desperately, but was proud of her daughter's courage in pursuing her dreams. Tommy, true to his word, joined the Army at 18 in 1894, stationed at a fort in Wyoming. Emma, at 17, was being courted by the schoolteacher's younger brother, a quiet young man who clearly adored her. Daniel, now 12, had his head constantly in books, talking about becoming a lawyer or perhaps even a doctor. Time, which had once moved so slowly in the desperate days of Helena's early widowhood, now seemed to fly. Before she knew it, she was 48 years old, a grandmother twice over through Jamie and Alice. Benjamin was 54, moving a bit slower but still vital and strong. The ranch employed 8 men full-time, prospering under their careful management. In the spring of 1897, Helena and Benjamin took a trip, just the 2 of them, leaving the ranch in Jamie's capable hands. They traveled to San Francisco to visit Sarah, who'd become a respected artist with her own studio. Then they continued to Sacramento to see Margaret, spending a week reminiscing and laughing. Finally, they took the train east, all the way to New York City, because Helena had always wanted to see the ocean and the great city. The trip was magical, a second honeymoon of sorts, reminding them of who they were beyond parents and ranchers. They held hands walking through Central Park, kissed like newlyweds on the ferry to Staten Island, made love in their hotel room with the abandon of youth despite their middle age. They talked about their early days, remembering the fear and hope that had mingled in that snowed-in cabin. "If I could go back," Benjamin said one evening as they watched the sun set over the harbor, "knowing what I know now, would I change anything? And I realize the answer is no. Not a single moment. Every hardship, every loss, every struggle led me to you. I'd weather it all again gladly for the life we've built." "So would I," Helena agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love James in my way, but what we have, Benjamin, this is what marriage should be. This partnership, this friendship, this love that's only grown stronger with time. I'm so grateful that storm trapped me at your cabin. It was the worst and best night of my life." They returned home to Nevada refreshed and reconnected, throwing themselves back into ranch life with renewed energy. The turn of the century came and went, marked by a huge celebration in Lovelock where the entire family gathered. Helena looked around at her children, her grandchildren, her husband, her sister's family who'd made the journey, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the abundance of her life. Tommy left the Army in 1901 and surprised everyone by becoming a railroad detective, traveling throughout the West investigating crimes. Sarah married a fellow artist in 1902, a bohemian wedding in San Francisco that raised eyebrows but made her happy. Emma married her school teacher's brother in a traditional ceremony in Lovelock, settling on a small ranch nearby. Daniel went east to attend Harvard, determined to become a lawyer, the first of their family to attend university. As 1910 approached, Helena turned 64, Benjamin 70. They'd officially retired from active ranch work, leaving the operation to Jamie and his oldest son while they enjoyed a slower pace. Benjamin still rode out every day to check fences and livestock, unable to fully let go, but the heavy work was done by younger men. Helena spent her time gardening, sewing for her grandchildren, and writing long letters to her scattered family. They'd been married 35 years, together for 36, and their love had never wavered. Oh, they'd had disagreements over the years, moments of frustration or anger, but nothing that threatened the foundation they'd built. They still held hands while walking, still kissed goodnight every evening, still found joy in each other's company. On a crisp November morning in 1910, almost exactly 36 years after that fateful storm, Helena and Benjamin rode out together to the site where his old cabin had stood. They'd torn it down years ago when building the new house, but the stone chimney still stood, a monument to where their story had begun. They'd made a ritual of visiting it on their anniversary, remembering. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if the storm hadn't come? Benjamin asked, his arm around Helena's shoulders as they stood looking at the old chimney. Sometimes, Helena admitted. I suppose I would have made it to Carson City eventually, raised Jamie with Margaret's help, probably never remarried. A half-life, always looking backward. Nothing like the richness I've known with you. I think of that lonely man I was, and I can barely recognize him, Benjamin said. You brought me back to life, Helena. You and Jamie and all our children, all our years together. I used to think Sarah's death was the end of my story, but it was only the end of one chapter. You were the beginning of the real story, the one worth telling. Helena turned in his arms, looking up at the face she'd loved for over 3 decades. There were more lines now, more gray, but the eyes were the same, still that startling blue, still looking at her with devotion and desire. I love you, Benjamin Walker. I will love you until my dying breath and beyond. And I love you, Helena Walker. You are the greatest gift of my life, and I thank God for that storm every single day. They kissed there beside the old chimney, two people who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built a lifetime of light together. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of coming snow, but neither of them feared it. They'd weathered far worse and survived, not just survived, but thrived, together. Over the following years, as they moved into their 70s, Benjamin and Helena slowed but never stopped. They became the beloved patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family. 6 children, 17 grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren as well. Sunday dinners at the big house were raucous affairs with multiple generations present, the table groaning under the weight of food, the house filled with love and laughter. Helena had always thought her life would be ordinary, maybe even difficult given the circumstances of her early widowhood. Instead, it had been extraordinary in the best possible way. Not because of wealth or fame or grand adventures, but because of love sustained over time, family built through choice and effort, a partnership that had weathered every storm. In 1922, Benjamin fell ill with pneumonia in the winter. He was 78, and despite Dr. Hayes's successor's best efforts, his recovery was slow and incomplete. He never quite regained his full strength, and Helena knew with a sinking certainty that their time was growing short. She devoted herself to his care, sitting by his bedside, reading to him, holding his hand, giving back a fraction of the love and care he'd shown her over nearly 5 decades. One evening in late March, with spring beginning to green the valley, Benjamin called their children to his bedside. Jamie came from the ranch, Sarah from San Francisco, Tommy from his home in Denver where he'd settled after retiring from railroad work, Emma from her nearby ranch, and Daniel from his law practice in Carson City. They gathered around their father's bed, Helena at his side, her hand clasped firmly in his. "I want you all to know," Benjamin said, his voice weak but clear, "that I've had a good life, better than I ever deserved or imagined. Your mother gave me that life, gave me all of you, gave me joy beyond measure. When I'm gone, you take care of her, you hear? She's the best woman I've ever known, and she deserves every happiness." "Papa, don't talk like that," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to recover." "You always do." Benjamin smiled gently. "Not this time, sweet girl, but don't be sad. I'm 78 years old and I've had almost 50 years with the love of my life. How many people can say that? I'm ready. The only regret I have is leaving your mother, but I'll be waiting for her on the other side. I promise you that." Helena couldn't speak through her tears, could only hold his hand and try to memorize every detail of his face. That night, with all their children keeping vigil, with the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Benjamin Walker closed his eyes for the final time, a slight smile on his lips, Helena's hand in his. The grief nearly crushed her. After 48 years together, Helena felt like half of herself had been torn away. The big house felt impossibly empty without Benjamin's presence, without his steady companionship. Her children urged her to come stay with one of them, but she refused. This was her home, the house they'd built together, and she wouldn't abandon it. But as the months passed and the sharp edges of grief softened into a dull, constant ache, Helena found ways to continue. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them the stories of the family, making sure they knew their grandfather's legacy. She worked in her garden, finding solace in growing things. She wrote letters, maintaining connections with her scattered family. And every evening, she sat on the porch swing Benjamin had built decades ago, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking to him as though he could hear. In the summer of 1925, Helena celebrated her 80th birthday surrounded by her enormous family. Looking at the crowd gathered on her lawn, 3 generations of children born from that desperate night in the storm, she felt Benjamin's presence so strongly it was as though he stood beside her. She lived for more years, sharp-minded and independent to the end. On a cold November morning in 1929, Jamie found her in her bed, peaceful and still, a letter to Benjamin clutched in her hand. The letter spoke of love and gratitude, of the life they'd shared, of her eagerness to see him again. "I'm coming home to you," she'd written. "Wait for me just a little longer, my love." They buried her beside Benjamin on a hill overlooking the ranch, the headstones side by side. The inscription reads simply, Benjamin Walker, 1844–1922, and Helena Walker, 1845–1929, beloved husband and wife, together forever. Below that, added by their children, a single line, born of a storm, built on love, eternal in our hearts. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one knowing the story of how it began. With a pregnant widow lost in a blizzard, a lonely cowboy who opened his door, and a love that proved stronger than any storm. It became family legend, told and retold, embellished slightly with each telling but always returning to the essential truth. That sometimes fate intervenes in the most unexpected ways, bringing together souls that were meant to find each other. Years turned into decades, and the 20th century progressed, bringing changes the young Helena and Benjamin could never have imagined. But the ranch remained, a testament to what they'd built together. Great-great-grandchildren walked the same land, worked the same earth, gazed at the same mountains. The old stone chimney from the original cabin was preserved as a historic marker, a monument to where it all began. And on cold November nights when the wind howled and snow began to fall, those who lived on the ranch would sometimes swear they could hear laughter in the storm, the sound of a man and woman who'd found love in the unlikeliest of circumstances and held on to it through every season of life, their joy echoing through time itself, eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the enduring power of love discovered, nurtured, and cherished until death and beyond.